The smell reached me before I realized I had wandered too far from the trail. At first, it drifted in faintly, almost easy to ignore, like the distant scent of something overripe carried on a shifting breeze. But with each step I took, it thickened, growing heavier, sweeter, so sweet it felt wrong. It clung to the inside of my nose and coated the back of my throat, making me swallow again and again as if I could push it away. I paused, glancing back toward the path I had left behind, now barely visible through the dense trees. Every instinct suggested I should turn around, yet something about that unnatural sweetness pulled me forward. The woods seemed quieter the deeper I went, as though sound itself was being swallowed. The usual rustling of leaves and distant bird calls faded into an uneasy stillness. My footsteps became the only noise, muffled by damp soil and fallen branches. I noticed then how the air felt different, thicker, almost humid despite the cool shade, pressing lightly against my skin. The smell was stronger now, unmistakable, and it seemed to radiate from somewhere just ahead. I spotted it then, a small break in the undergrowth where the tangled plants had been pushed aside. It didn't look natural. The branches were bent at odd angles, leaves crushed and darkened as though something had forced its way through and never bothered to return them to place. I hesitated, standing at the edge of it, listening for any sign of movement. There was nothing. Not even the wind. My hand moved almost on its own, reaching out to pull back the cluster of leaves and thin branches blocking the view. For a brief moment, I saw only shadows beneath, a patch of darkness where sunlight couldn't quite reach. Then my eyes adjusted, and the shape came into focus. At first, it didn't register as a person. It looked like something discarded, something left behind and forgotten. The colors were wrong, greens and blacks blending together in a way that didn't belong to living flesh. The body was swollen, stretched in places and collapsed in others, the surface uneven and glistening in a way that made my stomach tighten. There was a faint movement across it, subtle but constant, as insects moved freely, undisturbed by my presence. The smell surged, overwhelming now that I stood so close. It wasn't just sweetness anymore, it was decay layered beneath it, thick and suffocating. My chest tightened as I tried to breathe through my mouth, but the taste of it followed, clinging stubbornly. Then I saw the face, or what remained of it. The features were distorted, barely recognizable, yet undeniably human. And in that instant, the realization struck fully, cold and absolute. This wasn't something abandoned. This was someone time lost its shape after the call. I remember ending it, staring at my phone as if it might say something more, something useful, something that would make the next part easier. They had told me to stay where I was, to wait, that someone was on the way. Their voices had been calm, routine, as though this were an ordinary request. Maybe for them it was. For me, it felt like being anchored to something I didn't understand and didn't want to. I tried to put distance between myself and the body without actually leaving it. A few steps back, then a few more, until the undergrowth pressed against me from behind and I had nowhere else to go. From there, I could still see him through the broken patch of foliage, a distorted shape half hidden in shadow. I told myself that was enough. Close enough to follow instructions. Far enough to breathe. The light began to fade before I noticed it happening. The woods dimmed slowly at first, the green draining from the leaves, the spaces between the trees filling with a creeping gray. I kept checking my phone, expecting to see headlights in the distance or hear voices cutting through the silence, but there was nothing. No signal, no updates, just the steady tick of time slipping further into evening. As darkness settled in, the air seemed to shift. The warmth of the day vanished, replaced by a chill that seeped through my clothes and settled deep in my chest. The smell didn't fade with the light, it grew stronger, as if the night itself was drawing it out. I found myself turning my head, trying to escape it, but it lingered everywhere, thick and unavoidable. The sounds of the forest returned, but not in a comforting way. Leaves rustled without wind. Twigs snapped somewhere beyond the reach of my vision. Each noise felt deliberate, too precise to be random, as though something was moving just out of sight, circling, observing. I strained to listen, holding my breath at times, trying to separate real sounds from the ones my mind might be creating. I avoided looking directly at the body, but my eyes kept drifting back. There was a pull, subtle but constant, drawing my attention whether I wanted it or not. In the fading light, details blurred and shifted. Shapes seemed to change when I blinked. I caught myself staring longer than I should, trying to confirm that nothing had moved, that everything was exactly as it had been. That's when the feeling started. It wasn't sudden. It crept in quietly, settling over me like a second layer of skin. The unmistakable sense that I wasn't alone, not in the general way of being in the woods, but something closer, more focused. As if the space between me and the body wasn't empty at all, but occupied by something I couldn't see. I told myself it was fear. That it was natural. That anyone would feel the same standing in the dark beside something like that. But the thought didn't hold. The feeling remained, steady and unyielding, pressing in from all sides. And slowly, without realizing when it started, I began to feel as though I wasn't just waiting with the body. I was being watched. The longer I stood there, the more the silence seemed to change its texture. It wasn't empty anymore. It felt layered, as though something was sitting just beneath it, waiting for me to notice. At first, it came in small, almost dismissible moments, a faint whisper of sound that didn't quite form words, slipping in and out of the edges of my hearing. I would turn my head quickly, trying to catch it, but every time I focused, it vanished, leaving only the distant rustle of leaves and my own uneven breathing. I tried to ground myself, to focus on something real. The rough bark of a nearby tree under my fingers. The cold air brushing against my face. The dull glow of my phone screen, which I kept checking even though I knew there would be no signal. But every attempt to anchor myself seemed to fade, overshadowed by the growing sense that something wasn't right. Out of the corner of my eye, I began to notice movement. Subtle at first, just a shift in the darkness, like shadows stretching too far or pulling back too quickly. I told myself it was my imagination adjusting to the lack of light, my brain trying to make sense of shapes it couldn't fully see. But the movements didn't behave like shadows should. They didn't follow the fading light or the position of the trees. They felt independent, deliberate. Once, I was certain I saw something near the body. I froze, every muscle tightening as I stared into the broken patch of undergrowth. For a moment, everything was still. Then the shape seemed to settle, blending back into the darkness as if it had never been separate at all. My heart pounded so loudly it drowned out everything else, and I found myself holding my breath, afraid that even the smallest sound might draw attention to me. The whispers came again, closer this time. Not clear enough to understand, but distinct enough that I couldn't dismiss them as wind or distant noise. They carried a strange rhythm, almost like speech, rising and falling in uneven patterns. I strained to listen, leaning slightly forward without realizing it, as if I could pull the meaning out of the air. That's when I felt it. A presence, not just around me, but directed at me. Focused. It wasn't the vague sensation of being watched anymore, it was sharper, more intentional, as though something had turned its full attention in my direction. The hairs on my arms stood on end, and a cold weight settled at the base of my spine. I didn't want to look at the body again. But I did. And for a split second, I thought I saw the position of his head had changed. Just slightly, just enough that it no longer matched the image burned into my memory from before. I blinked hard, staring, trying to confirm it, but the darkness made everything uncertain. The shape lay still, unchanged, lifeless. Yet the feeling didn't fade. If anything, it deepened, pressing closer, as though whatever had been stirring in the shadows was no longer content to remain unseen. By the time the police arrived, the tension had stretched so thin it felt like it might snap at any moment. Their voices cut through the darkness before their faces became visible, beams of light slicing between the trees as they approached. Relief came fast, almost overwhelming, washing over me in a way that made my knees feel weak. The presence I had felt, the whispers, the shifting shadows, everything seemed to retreat under the harsh glare of their flashlights. It was as if whatever had been there could not exist under that kind of scrutiny. They asked questions, practical ones, grounded ones. Where had I found him? How long had I been there? Had I touched anything? Their tone was steady, routine, and I clung to that normalcy. I answered as clearly as I could, though my voice sounded distant to my own ears, like it belonged to someone else. One of them moved closer to the body, crouching down, examining it with a kind of detached focus that made my stomach turn. Another stayed near me, occasionally glancing in my direction as if to make sure I didn't collapse. When they finally covered the body, something about that simple act shifted the entire scene. The shape beneath the fabric no longer looked like a person, just an outline, an object to be removed and processed. The smell still lingered, but it seemed less personal now, less invasive. They spoke quietly among themselves, using terms I didn't fully catch, their voices low and controlled. Eventually, one of them approached me again and explained, in a calm, almost rehearsed manner, that it appeared to be a suicide. There was no immediate sign of foul play, no indication that anyone else had been involved. It was presented as something closed, something understood. A tragic but straightforward explanation. I nodded as if that answer settled everything. At the time, it almost did. The idea that it had been his own decision, that there was no hidden threat lingering in the woods, gave me something solid to hold on to. It turned the night into something unfortunate but explainable, something that could be filed away as a bad experience rather than something unknown. But that certainty didn't last. The first dream came the same night. I didn't remember falling asleep, only that I was suddenly back in the woods, standing in the same spot, the same darkness pressing in from all sides. The smell was there again, stronger than before, thick enough to make it hard to breathe. And then I saw him. Not as he had been found, not broken and decayed, but not whole either. His form shifted between states, features slipping in and out of recognition, as though my mind couldn't decide how he should appear. But his eyes, those were clear. Fixed on me with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. He spoke, though his mouth barely moved. The words weren't loud, but they filled the space completely, leaving no room for anything else. There was anger in them, deep and unyielding, directed entirely at me. A sense of accusation, of intrusion, as if my presence had disturbed something that should have remained untouched. I woke up suddenly, my heart racing, the echo of his voice still lingering in my head as though it hadn't been a dream at all. At first, I told myself it was just a reaction. Anyone would have been affected after something like that. The mind has a way of replaying what it doesn't understand, reshaping it, exaggerating it, trying to make sense of it in the only way it can. That's what I believed during the first few nights when the dreams kept returning. They were never exactly the same, but they always began in the same place. The woods. The darkness. That suffocating sweetness in the air. And then him. Sometimes he stood at a distance, half hidden between the trees, his shape barely holding together, as if he were made of smoke and shadow rather than flesh. Other times he was closer, close enough that I could see the details shifting across his face, never settling into one form for long. But no matter how far away he seemed at first, he always ended up right in front of me. And he always spoke. The words were clearer with each dream, sharper, more defined. There was no confusion about what he wanted. No room to misinterpret the tone. It wasn't just anger, it was something deeper, something colder. A resentment that felt personal, as though I had done more than simply find him. As though I had taken something from him. I would wake up drenched in sweat, the echo of his voice still circling in my head. For a while, I could convince myself it ended there, that it was contained within sleep. But then small things started to bleed through into the day. It began with moments that were easy to dismiss. Catching a faint trace of that same sweet smell in places it didn't belong, inside my house, in the middle of a crowded street, even once while sitting in a brightly lit room surrounded by other people. It would come and go quickly, gone before I could fully react, leaving me questioning whether it had been there at all. Then came the sense of being watched. Not constantly, not enough to make me panic outright, but often enough to unsettle me. I would turn suddenly, convinced someone was standing behind me, only to find empty space. Reflections in windows seemed to linger a fraction too long, shadows appearing where there shouldn't be any. At night, the darkness in my room felt heavier, thicker, as though it held more than just the absence of light. Sleep became something I started to dread. Because the dreams changed. He wasn't just waiting for me there anymore. It felt like he knew things, details about my life, fragments of thoughts I hadn't spoken aloud. The way he spoke shifted too, less distant, more direct, as if the space between us was shrinking with each passing night. And once, just once, I heard his voice when I was awake. Not loud, not even fully formed, but close, too close. A whisper brushing against my ear, carrying that same unmistakable tone. I froze, every part of me going still as I tried to listen, to understand, but it faded almost immediately. After that, it became harder to separate what was real from what wasn't. Harder to believe that he was only in my dreams.